Last episode, we were barely introduced to a world featuring the Transformers without any Transformers in it. The only glimpse of those beautiful, glorious beings that we got was a single-page image of the Decepticon Soundwave buried in snow and ice and seemingly deactivated. The recovery effort of said Decepticon was being led by a man called Lazarus, and that's about all we know. This time, our story opens in the hot and humid jungles of South America. The exact location is unknown, but it's nighttime, and we see two men. They both look like mercenaries or soldiers, it's hard to tell which. They're dressed in green combat fatigues, guarding a camp of matching tents. One of the men, who is sporting a red bandana, complains about night patrol. He asks his companion if he has a light for his cigarette. The other man, with long white hair pulled back in a ponytail, sighs as he digs through his pocket. "You know the commander doesn't like them smoking at night. It could give away their position." Lucky for Bandana that the general is sleeping then. He lights a cigarette, takes a drag off of it, and then gets up. He's allowed to pee, yeah? Or does he need the general's permission for that, too? Ponytail walks a few feet away, giving his comrade some privacy to do his business. As Bandana takes a leak, we can see behind him. Something emerges from the trees behind Ponytail. A massive metal hand. It closes around Ponytail in one swift motion, crushing him. As that happens, Bandana now asks if he should ask the general for permission to pull his pants up. When there's no reply, he spins around, nervous. His cigarette drops from his mouth as he sees Ponytail's crushed body, bleeding and bent. Bandana brings his gun around, and a massive foot steps down next to him. He looks up at the metal giant, just in time for the other foot to come down, on top of him. As the attack begins, the camera pulls out to a bird's-eye view of the surrounding jungle. All that we can see is an enormous fireball as something explodes, consuming the jungle. My name is Ben, and this is Comic Book Breakdown episode 21.2 of Dreamwave's Transformers: The Best Laid Plans. Author Chris Saraceni and artist Pat Lee continue the tone and vibe that they established in the previous issue. One of grounded realism, focusing on how dangerous and impressive the Transformers would be in reality. It's hard to gauge what Transformer it was that attacked these men, as we just barely see whoever it was, but I find it hard to believe that they could move so stealthily through the jungles of South America that no one would notice their approach. This is like a 2-story tall robot, guys, and he's reaching through jungle trees. There's no way that his arm and forearm would have fit through something like that. That said, it is super creepy seeing that hand just come out of the shadows and just crushing Ponytail with a single motion. It reminds me of like a human killing a fly. And from something of a Transformers size perspective, it's probably about the same. We then bounce to, hey, check this out. We bounce to the suburbs of Cleveland, Ohio, where we see a man wake up and go through his morning routine. He brushes his teeth, he shaves, gets dressed, and grabs his metal lunchbox. Wow, I haven't seen a metal lunchbox in ages. And then heads out the door. Before he can leave, though, his son runs up to him, holding out his work helmet. Written on it is his name, Spike. The kid says that he wrote his dad's name on it so that he wouldn't lose it. Spike kisses Daniel's forehead and thanks him. As he turns to leave, though, Spike suddenly freezes. There are two men standing on his stoop. One is dressed in a black suit with glasses, clearly some kind of Secret Service agent. The other wears a green military uniform. He's some kind of officer. He is older, with a face lined with wrinkles and a breast covered in medals and adornments. The older man sticks his hand out. "Good morning." Spike is immediately on edge. "Can I help you?" The general asks if they can talk inside, but Spike isn't thrilled with letting strangers in his house. The officer introduces himself as General Hello, who heads a subdivision of the military in charge of developing new technology. The man in black is Lou. He's a friend. Since we're no longer strangers, can we come in now? Spike tries one more time to pass on whatever this is. He needs to get to work. General Hallow replies that he actually doesn't. They've got a leave of absence set up for him, and it is all paid for. Don't even worry. Your bank account won't even notice the change. Once inside the house, the general lights a cigar, without even asking, which is rude AF, and makes Spike an offer that he can't refuse. The Department of War Technology needs Spike's skills and expertise, so he is coming with them. For those unfamiliar with the Transformers cartoon, Spike Witwicky was the teenage sidekick of the Transformers. He often palled around with Bumblebee and was shown as a grown adult in the animated movie. The teenage sidekick in that movie was actually his son, Daniel, who we meet here as a child. Given that this is a Transformers comic book, it's a safe bet that the DWT wants Spike for his Transformers knowledge. That's not some kind of plot twist or anything. Saraceni does all of this slow storytelling, building up to what the DWT wants, displaying their reach and power here for some kind of mysterious purpose. But as an audience, we know that it's going to end up being Transformers related. I mean, it's a Transformers comic book. We have seen a Transformer. Spike is from the Transformers cartoon. Why introduce all of this suspense in order to reveal something that we already know to expect? You dig? The tone here works really well for the way that he's telling the story, but I don't think the tone works very well here for the audience of the story. I do still enjoy that tone. Reading the comic in one sitting, it works really well, actually. But sitting down and examining these comics scene by scene, like I always do for Breakdown, it starts to show us some of the, not cracks, I don't think it's a break in the story, it's more like the seam of the story. We can see where these pieces of fabric are going to get together and how they fit together, but because we know that, we also know that at the end we're going to be making a t-shirt, right? We're really telegraphing what's going on here. We then move to the Northwest Territories of Canada, where we rejoin the man called Lazarus. He's traveling through the snowy landscape in a Jeep, which really seems like a bad vehicle choice for a winter wonderland in a snowstorm, with someone else driving and a man in the back. The man in the back has a bag over his head, and he is beginning to get anxious. He's known for having some contentious political views across the globe, and he isn't terribly comfortable going to an undisclosed location with a bag on his head. Lazarus says that he understands what Mr. Bishop does and is. He's a terrorist, and here Bishop cuts him off. "I am a freedom fighter," he insists. "Yeah, sure," Lazarus replies. Anyways, a high degree of secrecy is what has allowed Lazarus to be as successful as he has been. When they get there and Bishop can see his product for himself, he will find the momentary discomfort to have been well worth it. Then he turns to the driver. "Stop the Jeep." They all get out and start to shuffle through the snow. Bishop is more than a bit paranoid. Is Lazarus concerned that they're going to be followed? Is that a thing? Should he be worried about that? No, the mysterious man replies. They have someone watching their backs. In the foreground, as the three men walk away, fading into the snow, we see the green Jeep shift and transform into a humanoid shape. It crosses its arms and watches. This scene is basically a replay of what we saw in the preview issue. Lazarus has access to some of the Transformers. In that story, we saw a Decepticon, Soundwave, and here we have an Autobot, Hound. If they are working with him, it is certainly interesting that we have seen a mix of them. In the cartoon, both sides would ally with various humans throughout its run, but never for very long, and the Decepticons usually plan to portray them ASAP because that's what they do. They are Decepticons. They are deceptive. Saraceni has now added in a new wrinkle. The man that Lazarus is dealing with here is a known terrorist. The guy we saw last issue, Ratzenberg, didn't really have any kind of moral leaning. He was just there, for the most part, and looking to make a profit. But the presence of Mr. Bishop indicates that whatever Lazarus is up to, he isn't applying any moral scruples. As the men finish their walk, Lazarus does a Bishop-centric sales pitch. As a, let's say, warrior, Bishop is used to war. He's used to his men dying. Bishop's record of victories isn't all that great, but that's where Lazarus comes in. He knows why Bishop has failed all this time. Quote, "Your soldiers hold guns," end quote. And Bishop, already a little insulted by that whole "your men have died quite a bit" line, is like, "Oh, that's my problem? Thanks, man, but, what do you suggest we do with guns instead? How else would you use a gun other than to hold it? Adoy." Lazarus pulls a piece of paper out of his pocket, and he starts to fold it. Bishop needs soldiers who are guns. Soldiers who aren't hindered by their humanity. Ones who can shed their form and become something else. Lazarus holds up the piece of paper once he is done folding it. It is now a crane. "We're here," he says, stopping Bishop. He pulls off the burlap sack. It takes a moment for Bishop's eyes to adjust to the light, but when they clear, he is left near speechless by the sight. We move to the Pentagon, where we find Spike Witwicky sitting on a bench, reading a newspaper as he waits for his meeting. The newspaper is entitled, "Reliving the Ark II Tragedy. What Happened?" And quite a bit of the article is readable. It tells us that 3 years ago, a spacecraft called the Ark II detonated in midair. Spike looks up from the article, clearly upset of having seen it. It's okay, though, as a secretary pokes her head out of an office. They're ready to see him. As he stands, a janitor wielding a mop puts a hand on Spike's shoulder. He warns him to keep an eye out. Nothing is what it seems here. In fact, there's something more to this than meets the eye. Wink. The secretary is like, "Larry, stop bothering people. Jesus." She apologizes to Spike for the annoyance and ushers him inside. We then enter a high-tech military monitoring room. Screens line the walls and banks of computers take up most of the floor space. General Hallow greets Spike and asks how his brother is doing. This throws Spike. Excuse me? Hallow comments that the nation is still taking the Ark II tragedy hard, and some people are taking it harder than others. He remembers seeing Buster at the funeral. He was quite the mess. Spike closes his eyes. They were all a mess. His dad, all those people on the Ark II, they deserved better. And now that his emotional wounds have had their scabs picked at, Spike is a bit feisty. Why is he here? Why bring him all the way to the Pentagon just to poke at old wounds? "All right," Hallow says, "that's fair. He didn't mean to do any harm, it's just that the tragedy is a big part of why Spike is here. The whole Ark II mission was meant to change the world. A delegation of humanity's best and brightest were going to go to an alien planet, Cybertron, home of the Transformers, and learn all that they could. If they had made it back to Earth, who knows how society would have advanced." Spike stares at the general. But they didn't. They died. "That's right," General Hallow says, nodding. He looks at one of the tech guys and orders them to bring up the footage. The computer screen displays satellite footage of a South American jungle as it burns. Rebels have been trying to overthrow the government for nearly a decade in this region, according to Hallow. Last night, those rebels were wiped off the face of the planet. Zoom in. When they do, standing at the heart of the flames is the leader of the Decepticons, Megatron. A face that Spike knows all too well. The screenshot of Megatron increases in resolution as the comic shifts to Lazarus's secret base and we look at the real deal. Bishop gazes at the 2-story robot as it sits in a chair deactivated. "Do you control it?" he asks. He sure does. Lazarus explains that his scientists have been able to implant pre-programmed directives directly into its brain. This allows the robot to use its intelligence to find the best way to accomplish a task, but also not think for itself. They have also programmed it to respond solely to Lazarus's voice, and he gives a demonstration. He orders Unit 6, Megatron to activate. Clamps holding Megatron's hands to the chair unlock and fall to the side. It stands, and Bishop jumps. Lazarus assures him that he is perfectly safe. He orders Megatron to raise his left arm, and he does. He orders Megatron to raise his right arm, and he does. He orders Megatron to kneel, and he does not. He repeats the order, and still nothing happens. Lazarus shrugs it off. No biggie. He'll have his boys go over the thing's brain again and tweak the controls a little bit. You know, just last night, Subject 6 successfully completed a job for a client in South America, so don't you worry not a bit. He orders Subject 6 to deactivate, and Megatron returns to his seat. There's more to see, Lazarus says, and he and Bishop move on. When they do, the lights in the room shut off. But Megatron's eyes, formerly a dull, lightless red, turn on. Ooh, this is one of those moments where the pacing that Saraceni has been using, flooping, works. It is totally a cliche, absolutely. Like, the fact that Lazarus thinks that he can control Megatron for any usable length of time is laughable. The Transformers are living machines that operate in ways that humanity doesn't even have words for. And you think 1999 era technology is going to keep them in line? Much less one of the most devious, most willful of the Decepticons? Yeah, sure, man. How much of this scene is Lazarus controls failing, and how much of it is Megatron lying in wait, is left unclear. But Saraceni plays up the drama of the moment, it's very well paced, and I like intermingling this reveal to Bishop with Hallow's reveal to Spike. That transition was smooth as ice, and it worked really well. I like that. The book ends in a desert location. We are not told which state this time. We see a chain link fence with a sign on it, marking this area as Area 24. General Hallow and Spike are escorted inside by an armed guard. Hallow states that obviously the US government is concerned with the return of Megatron. The Transformers were clearly not destroyed in the explosion that took down the Ark II. So why is he back now? They've been inactive for 3 years. Who or what has brought them back? And for what purpose? They're guessing that someone is controlling Megatron, as he has no reason to attack some random rebels otherwise. But, if that is the case, then who is doing the controlling? The government doesn't intend to wait and find out. That is why they need Spike. The Witwicky's involvement with the Autobots is well known, and they're hoping that Spike can use that history to help them. To balance the scales, so to speak. Spike pauses. Whoa. Who is it? Who did you find? We turn to the final page of this issue, revealing the leader of the Autobots, Optimus Prime. And again, nice reveal. Cliched and totally telegraphed, but floop me, it works. Every time that I drop my guard and just let myself be in the world of the comic, I am brought to one of these moments, and man, Saraceni, you mad lad, you get me every time. I would argue that, so far, nothing has really happened in this comic, and this is pretty much exactly what we saw in the preview, but bigger and again. Lazarus has robots, somebody else was bound to get robots, here's some robots. We could have absolutely ignored the preview issue and started reading with issue 1, and we would be in exactly the same spot. From a story perspective, the preview did nothing, and that does make me a bit mad. If you're going to publish the preview and use it to tease and build up your series, it should present something unique that we aren't going to get to know otherwise. That's the point of making it a collectible kind of thing. Otherwise, it's not a collectible, it's just a tacked-on add-on. Similarly, I'm annoyed that there's barely any Transformers in my Transformers comic still. I'm definitely one of those fans who doesn't give a flying floop about the human stories and having a human audience stand-in character. Like, no. I don't want to be Spike or Daniel or Lazarus. I want to be Optimus Prime. I want to be Grimlock. I want to be a transforming robot who can kick butt and shoot fire. As such, I don't need any humans in my story. I'd have been fine if this comic just had robots fighting robots. That's what I show up for. But it isn't just that. I'm judging this comic based on what is presented to us, not what I would have wanted to have been presented, and I gotta say that I'm still digging this. The slow build has delivered some really solid moments, even if they aren't shocking, even if they are telegraphed, and I do think that the realistic tone still works. We're not reading anything special, but we are reading something that is well executed. The only two real goofs for me are Lazarus making the paper crane and Spike being at the Pentagon. Lazarus had a burlap sack over Bishop's face when he was doing the whole warriors that transform into guns speech and folding the paper, so when he holds out the crane, Bishop can't see it at all. So doing the crane to hit that point home that he needs transformable soldiers who can go from a plain piece of paper to a bird is a big miss for me. Like, the visual metaphor is kind of neat, but it doesn't hit Bishop at all, and it's actually kind of silly when you think about it. All this means is that Lazarus went for a walk and he made a paper crane, and then he went, look at my paper crane, and nobody could look at it. It's silly, and it's stupid, it's a little bit dumb. And Spike at the Pentagon is just a weird pacing thing for me. It means that Saraceni is telling us that General Hallow clearly knew about the Megatron attack before he went to Spike's place. That's what prompted him to go to Cleveland to pick up Spike personally, himself, like in person. And then I'm assuming they flew to the Pentagon, and once they arrived, Hallow ditched Spike? What the hell kind of sense of urgency is that? What did he do in the meantime? Drop a major deuce? And then, when he sees Spike again and asks how he's doing and how his brother is doing, just... what? From a conversational standpoint, that's just weird. Wouldn't you ask about his brother back in Cleveland when you were first meeting the guy? Why would you bring him up here and now? I'm guessing that Saraceni wanted to segue into talking about the Arc 2 tragedy, because that's kind of where Hallow takes the rest of the conversation, but then just have him talk about it. Why this weird, personal, painful in? And adding in the comment about Buster being a mess at the funeral, what does that get the General? He isn't here to be best friends with Spike. He's trying to ally with him so that he can, I don't know, be a liaison with the Transformers again. Why not skip the personal trauma and then focus on the mission? And what general picks up a civilian from his home personally? How does Hallow not have people for this? And what the
No swearing
is up with Larry the janitor? Why would he do that? Is Larry hinting that Hallow isn't being fully honest with Spike? Because I gotta say, he seems like he's on the level so far. Was that whole thing just an excuse to add in the "more than meets the eye" line? Because it's just so weird to have something like that happen. Like, if I was in something like the Pentagon, reading a newspaper, and someone was like, oh, hey, your meeting's ready, and I get up and a janitor claps me on the shoulder and goes, hey, be careful, things here are more than meets the eye, I'm definitely going to think he's crazy and that the Pentagon has a security leak. Like, I probably wouldn't do anything about it because I would just be weirded out, and I would just be like, yeah, man, you got it. And I would just go to my meeting, but it's weird. Despite these strange story problems, it isn't enough to derail me from the rest of the comic, which I am still really enjoying. Plus, there's some nice bonus material in this comic. In the center of it is a 2-page image of the Combiner Predaking, fighting Autobot combiners Superion and Defensor. It is a great looking picture by Guido Guidi, but you do have to kind of tear it out of your comic in order to display it. Thankfully, they at least had the foresight to print ads on the exterior 2 pages of the image, so if you can successfully remove it, you also won't be removing 2 pages of comic book from your comic book. But good luck with that. I have never had good experiences removing things that were stapled into my comic books, so I am not playing with this one. It can stay right where it is. Thank you very much. Anyways, after the main story, we do have the entirety of the Arc 2 newspaper article presented to us as well. It is a full 2 pages of text, and it basically fills us in on what the Arc 2 project was, as well as the history of this comic book. In short, the world teamed up with the Autobots in order to defeat the Decepticons sometime vaguely after the end of the cartoon and the start of this comic book. It cost humanity a lot of lives, and it took them quite a few years, but they did. Humans and Autobot then built a spaceship based on the Autobots' original ship, called the Ark, and placed the Decepticons on it. They were going to return those a-holes to Cybertron and leave Earth in peace. However, a delegation of humans elected to go with them in order to study Cybertron and, all that crap jazz. It was mostly scientists, save for Sparkplug Witwicky, the father of Spike. And yes, he is listed in the article as Sparkplug. Apparently, he had a couple of different first names in the cartoon, and rather than picking just one to canonize, Dreamwave just skipped it entirely. Interestingly, the character of Buster Witwicky originally appeared in the Marvel Comics run of Transformers. However, the name Buster was originally planned to be used in the cartoon, and an original design document shows the teenage boy character, who would later go on to become Spike, with the name Buster written next to it, but it is crossed out, and Spike was written instead. Marvel's editor-in-chief at the time, Jim Shooter, said that the name change from Spike back to Buster in the Marvel comic was mandated by the cartoon's producers. They thought that the name Spike was too violent. But then they changed it back for the cartoon, calling him Spike for seemingly no reason, and to the best of my knowledge, Spike has stuck ever since. It is certainly the name that I know him by. The article is honestly a nice bit of world building, and it does fill in a large gap between the cartoon and the start of this comic. It's incredibly dry, of course, it is a newspaper article, but I do applaud Dreamwave taking the time to write the whole thing out. It's not often that you get a real newspaper article in a comic book featuring a newspaper. Like, normally you just get gibberish or bullcrap Latin. Issue 2 picks up right where we left off, with Spike and General Halo looking at the inert body of Optimus Prime. They found his body in the Arctic Ocean, Halo says. The best tech guys that they have gone over him, and they can't figure out why he won't wake up. Halo brought Spike into all of this because they have no idea what they're doing anymore, and they hope that he might have some insight. Spike sighs. Alright, open up his chest. As Halo's engineers comply, Spike climbs onto Prime's now prone body. He undoes the top few buttons of his shirt, exposing a small orb held on a chain. It appears to be made of metal with small blue circles set inside of it. Are they crystals? Are they screws? I can't really tell, but Spike tells us what it is. When the Arc 2 was going into space, Optimus Prime gave him this. It is a piece of the Matrix. Prime promised that he would return for it when they all came back, with Spike's dad. But Sparkplug never did come back, did he? He died. And yet, here Prime is. For a moment, just a moment, Spike thinks about withholding the Matrix piece. It might bring Optimus back, sure, but it'll never bring back his father. But the world needs Optimus Prime. Spike drops the small orb into Prime's chest cavity, and a bright light blinds him and Halo. You're going to hear this complaint again later on in this issue, but why is Optimus Prime inert? He was caught in a massive explosion, sure, and then crashed into the ocean. I can see that rattling a 2-story tall robot around enough to knock them out for a few hours. But 3 years? 3 years? So that's a weird and unexplained plot point. I can buy that the government's techies couldn't fix Prime because humanity doesn't really understand the Transformers' particular form of biology anyways. But why does Prime need the Matrix specifically to wake him up, when Lazarus's men are able to bring a handful of bots back online themselves? How does he have that level of tech or expertise? There's a disparity here between the forces of the United States government, which I think would be far-reaching and wide, and Lazarus's resources. And don't get me wrong, he's privately backed, so I'm sure he's got a ton of money, but he's really able to hire tech guys who are that much more skilled than the U.S. government? There's a disparity here that we're not given a good reason for, and it frustrates me just a little bit. Secondly, when Prime's chest is opened up, it is empty. The Matrix of Leadership is a semi-religious artifact for the Autobots and is held in safety by whoever their leader is. Both Optimus Prime and Generation 2 leader Rodimus Prime have cavities in their chest that house the Matrix, but Optimus Prime's chest is totally empty. So what happened to the Matrix? Where did it go? I can buy that Spike's percentage of the Matrix contained enough power to get Prime on his feet, but I feel like we still have a mystery here. Emotionally, though, I really like this beat with Spike. The moment where he is so upset about his dad, the loss is still so powerful that for a moment he considers leaving Prime like this. I love that. There's a humanity there, a bitterness that we don't normally see in a Transformer story. But this version is taking inspiration from the tonal shift that all comic books saw in the post-9/11 world. Heroes are flawed in this world, villains can win, and tragedy is always closer at hand than you would like it to be. On that note, I would like to point out that the US government has had custody of Prime for an undisclosed amount of time, and only when they need something do they contact Spike for help. Prime and the rest of the Transformers are sentient beings. They are thinking, feeling people, and the government chose to hide Prime rather than help him. That same hint of darkness that we see in Spike is present in the government too. Speaking of bad guys, we now return to the Arctic, this time joining the Smitco oil refinery. They're all hard at work refining that black gold when one of the men spots something approaching. 3 helicopters are coming closer. Suspended between them all is a massive metal cage. No one is quite sure what is happening, but it's not like there's much that they can do to stop it. Once they are in position, the helicopter's tow lines explode, and the cage slams into the ground. The 4 walls fall off, and a door of a box inside of the box raises upward. A mix of Transformers exit, including Soundwave, Bumblebee, and Grimlock. They tear into the refinery with ease. Equipment is torn to pieces, walls are smashed down, buildings are shot with lasers. As the chaos goes on, we see that Starscream, Rumble, and Prowl are there as well. As fire consumes the facility, we see Bumblebee, one of the kindest, gentlest Autobots, standing in the flames, emotionless, unfazed. Footage of the attack is being played at Lazarus's facility, notably through the espionage-based Transformer Laserbeak. Lazarus is making a presentation to a full room of potential clients, ranging from businessmen to military leaders to political revolutionaries. "There you go," he says, "a perfect demonstration of the perfect weapon. Emotionless, reliable, ruthless, all packaged and ready to meet whatever goals you have. And let me tell you, folks, I do not care what your goals are." The room applauds enthusiastically. "Cool. So, how much are you folks willing to pay for this kind of weapon?" Lazarus asks. Bids erupt from all over the room. The demand is clear, but let's not start bidding on these less impressive models, Lazarus says. "How about we start with the deluxe package?" At his signal, Lazarus's men pull off a sheet from Megatron's body. More bids, exponentially higher than the first round, start coming in. They top out at $85 million, and Lazarus is pleased. Until he hears a voice behind him. Quote, "Do you know what I hate most about humans? Nature, war, God. You think you can control it all. I don't know what's larger, your arrogance or your stupidity." End quote. Megatron stands, shattering the clamps that had been holding him down. The bidders scream and flee, but Lazarus is too close to get away. Megatron picks him up by a single hand, dangling him between two fingers. "It's time for some fun now." Having caught up with Megatron, we now bounce over to Optimus Prime, and, his human allies. They have been transported to the location where they found Prime, and now stand on an Arctic snow shelf. The crisp, cold ocean roars nearby. General Hallow says that they found him on the ocean floor, about 1,500 yards from the shoreline. Prime starts to walk to the edge. He needs to find the others. Hallow protests. They don't have time for this. But as Prime steps over the humans, he is stunned into silence. Prime opens up his chest compartment and pulls out the Matrix of Leadership, a multifaceted crystal housed in a metallic frame. He holds the Matrix up, and light pours from it. That energy penetrates the deep ocean waters, bathing the inert forms of Autobots Mirage and Jazz. They reactivate. Frozen within the ice nearby, the twins, Yellow Sunstreaker and Red Sideswipe, burst forth. They are joined soon by Wheeljack. And then one massive form comes last. It rises from the ocean like Godzilla, millions of gallons of water pouring off of its back. This is the Combiner Superion. He marches to shore where the other Autobots are gathered. Prime greets them all. The scene is quick, and it does its job well. Optimus Prime summons his troops, and we have some good guys. Huzzah! But it doesn't make much sense. First off, and I touched upon this a little bit earlier, why are all of these characters inert? Transformers are able to operate underwater just fine. They're either waterproof or it just doesn't affect them, whatever. It's been established, it's canon. And last we knew, they were all caught in an explosion, that of the Ark 2, and I could see that and the subsequent landing knocking some of them out for a time period. But for 3 years? Again, why? Saraceni, I'm willing to listen here. I'm open-minded. Just give me something. I just want a reason. Say that the passengers of the Ark 2 were put into stasis for the trip. It wouldn't really be necessary for the Transformer passengers, because they're immortal robots, but maybe they did it as a courtesy for the human passengers. There, easy. Just throw that in there as a line of dialogue, and we're done, and one of my biggest complaints about this moment just vanishes into the mist. I would also like to point out that the entire Matrix of Leadership is back in Prime's chest, where it was missing from before. Whatever Spike did with his piece, and again, it was hanging on a chain on his neck, so it's a small, maybe, quarter-sized piece of crystal, it somehow not only regenerated the entire crystal, which, from the way Prime holds it, I would say is at least as tall as a human, it also regrew its metal housing case, because that was not in Prime's chest either. That's something that doesn't get explained as well. Adding another layer of complication, why can the Matrix revive the Autobots? The Matrix rarely got used in the cartoon, and I will fully admit that its capabilities are largely unknown, but Prime pulls that baby out with intent. Like, he knows that this is what it's going to take to get those Autobots back online, and it does get them back online, but why does he know that? Were the Transformers' batteries just low and they needed a recharge? If so, that doesn't make a lot of sense. Classically, the Transformers race runs on a substance called energon, which can be refined from other high-energy resources like oil and ruby gems for some reason. The cartoon was really weird sometimes. But if they don't need energon and the Matrix can provide free, life-giving energy, then that negates half the conflict of the original cartoon. It flies in the face of everything we know about the Transformers up to this point. And furthermore, The Matrix revives a handful of the Autobots here, but not all of them. We are shown clear images of Autobots Huffer and Hoist, and yet they don't get back up. What is so different about them that they did not survive the explosion and crash, while the others did? I can understand the author choosing not to revive certain characters. There are a crap ton of Autobots in the first generation, and most of them didn't really get personalities in the cartoon. I can see cutting that number down and focusing on a core cast of characters. But you still need to provide a good reason why the ones that didn't revive. And Saraceni didn't. And one final thing. When Superion joins the others, he does so in his Gestalt form. For those unfamiliar, Combiners are a subsection of Transformers where multiple robots can come together to form a single massive robot. Like the Megazord from the Power Rangers, if you're familiar with those. In Superion's case, he is the combination of the Aerial Bots, a group of Autobots who are all airplanes. Classically, most of the Autobots are cars of some kind. They generally aren't weapons of war, and even the Aerial Bots, for the most part, aren't really like fighter jets and stuff like that, but they are airplanes. They're an interesting little subsection. And Saraceni is showing us that either they chose to travel in the Arc 2 as the super massive Superion, which seems like a really hard figure to try to cram into that tiny spaceship, or the Aerial Bots woke up underwater and their first thought was, how about we all combine? Guys, that sounds great. It's been a while since we've seen each other. Why don't we just plug in? And that also seems weird. I would think that losing consciousness and falling inert would have forced them to separate from their Gestalt form, assuming, again, that they flew in it. I feel like I remember seeing something somewhere where a combiner has to concentrate in order to hold their combined form, but I could be wrong, and Transformers lore is kind of tricky and ill thought out and ever-changing. So, too long, didn't read. I think that the details here are lacking. This almost feels like somebody's first fanfiction project, where they're clearly passionate about the thing they're writing about. They know the characters, they know the concepts. Again, I think the voices for a lot of these characters feel right so far, and I like the tone of the story, but the little details and plot concepts that are needed to make this like really solid A+ top-notch storytelling just aren't really there. Nearby, the helicopters that delivered Lazarus's robot attack squad are returning to base. One of the pilots reports that they are signaling the base about their approach, looking for clearance to land, but he's getting no response. They can all see a bright light, but with no communication, they don't know what that light is supposed to be. Their fuel reserves are getting low, so they plan to land. They don't really have a choice. As they approach, though, an explosion suddenly rocks the base. The pilot's eyes go wide. Megatron flies from the wrecked building, aiming his massive laser cannon at the helicopter. And everything goes black. Issue 2 ends. I'm not gonna lie, this ending feels very tacked on, but Saraceni is setting up a turn here. Remember, those helicopters are carrying a cage that houses both Decepticons and Autobots. Defenseless Autobots. And they are being delivered right into the murderous hands of their greatest enemy. Let that sit with you for a week. And on that note, next week, Optimus Prime and his Autobots are on the case, investigating the destruction of the Smitco oil refinery. But every second they're behind, the more time Megatron has to concoct his plans. And why bother returning to Cybertron? Well, you can just make a new Cybertron, using the Earth as your starting point. Join me in a week for Comic Book Breakdown episode 21.3 of Transformers. They're not worth it. Everyone, there are a million podcasts vying for your time and attention, and I'd like to thank you for listening to mine. If you would like to get in touch with me, to share a concern, request a series, compliment me, berate me, whatever you like, send me an email at cbbreakdown@gmail.com. Otherwise, thanks for listening.